Okay. I'm the past, so I'm glad that I'm first, so that we get that out of the way, and then we can get into the present and the future. The title of this lecture is Analog Letterforms to the Nth Degree, and you notice there's a big question mark after hand magic. Here's my disclaimer slide. I'm in 81, and I get a little befuddled, and so bear with me. Okay, so lettering, for me, all these years, all these decades, it goes back 60 years, I've been interested in historic letter forms and also kind of postmodern experimental letter forms. And here's an example of the two types of letter forms. The gather together on top is actually very readable and fairly conventional use of historic forms, and the bottom one is kind of more experimental, more difficult to read, and it's parallel words, and that's actually another thing that I'm quite interested in. But I've also worked in both ends of the spectrum, and so I'm going to be talking about that. So this is one end where it's still readable. Here it's less readable. It actually says question and answer and book review, book actually. Here it's looks like it should be readable, but it's not. And finally, it's just a trace of letter forms. There aren't any real letter forms in it, so it becomes kind of art at that end of the spectrum. So connotation and denotation. Obviously, the one is pure denotation, very readable and very logical, and the other one is connotation, and it's even a specific kind of connotation, sort of mid-century commercial art vernacular, and it's also meant to be the words are meant to kind of mirror the idea. So art is all artsy, and the American vernacular is more vernacular, and so on and so forth. So it's a subtle differences, but they're still there. Connotation and denotation. I did a lecture here in New York in the 90s during the culture wars between postmodern and modernist typography with Massimo Vignelli and me. So when Massimo saw this flyer, he said, "That's the problem with postmodern typography, you can't read it." And I said, "Yeah, that's true, because it's purely connotative. It's not meant to be read. And just like pure denotation, it's not meant to be connotative." And it was also during those Bodoni wars between Massimo and Immigré. So when I did the flyer, I did my Bodoni, and I added little licks to the serifs. And this then is the connotation. It has everything possible except the form of the letter. And here's another example of that where it isn't even the form of the letter when it's upper and lower case. And so this is postmodern pranks and pastiche and all that good stuff from that period, now maybe 20 years ago. And there's something semi-satirical and kind of jokey about it. And that's also interesting to me, especially kind of biomorphic letter forms and lettering sculpture. And so I'm going to be talking about letters and letter forms in this lecture. And my trajectory, as mentioned, was from commercial art and professional practice and to teaching in a kind of art design. And when I was a professional, the idea of the spectrum of work had to do with this little story about two masons asked what they're doing. And one of them said, I'm laying bricks, and the other one said, I'm building a cathedral. So my career also was a lot of laying bricks, and then there was also a little pretentious cathedral building. And, you know, for 30 years I made sugar-free candy for that eye which is in the economy of the beholder. You know, I worked in automotive advertising in Detroit, and actually this was a project that Alice Trumwell did years ago where she asked people, what is graphic design for? So that's what it's for. And then I've taught for 30 years at California Institute of the Arts, known as CalArts. And my teaching philosophy was, you know, rules are taught to be broken, made to be broken only exceptionally. And on the other hand, this is a t-shirt for the students, do what they say. So, you know, kind of question what instructors, professors say, but also do it. And there I am when I was your age, starting in the profession. You know, actually after high school, I went to a technical arts high school in Detroit and started working at 18 in the business. And when I first started, this was actually that NeoModern Revolution at hand was actually from 1958. And I was interested in what later became Art Deco, or called Art Deco. At the time it was called Modern. So, and I thought those letterforms were really weird and interesting. Even all the older people said, hey kid, you know, you can't do that, that's way in the past. And actually the irony of that is now my work, my past is far away from you guys as this was from me at the time. And also that other ragtime thing was done in the early 60s, and that's a kind of turn of the century typography. And when I did that, it was kind of a one-off, and little did I know that would come back and actually be the last part of my 30 years as a designer. And you know, Art Deco stuff then became really popular in the 60s and 70s, and I did tons of it for all sorts of clients. And that was during the so-called pushpin era, which I was part of. And it was a sort of rejection of American modernism and back to historicism and eclecticism. And then all of a sudden, Art Deco went away. But I was still interested in kind of, at the same time, doing experimental letterforms based on this idea of the process of constructing the forms along with the forms themselves. And, you know, I still revisit Art Deco every once in a while. There's something from flyer from 2007. And then it also becomes abstracted in my sketchbooks and finally just becomes kind of a trace in, you know, what might be called art. Everything I've done is analog, so these were the tools of the trade, very proudly displayed in 1970 in this poster that I did. And, you know, I used the templates to draw the forms. That comes out of the mechanical car illustrators in Detroit. And, you know, so I sketch something, an idea out, then I use the templates, and then I fill it in. In 1987, I went to Cranbrook and to get a master's degree so I could teach. And these are some student shenanigans that we did, you know, that deals with kind of the issues that we were talking about at that time. And so the mid-'80s was kind of the height of postmodern thinking and experimenting. And, so this was one of my projects at Cranbrook at that time. It's a manifesto. So I did it in hand lettering, and it asks, like, tend to marginal features, what can't it mean? can't even read it anymore. Anyway, indulge yourself in the same self again, anew, and anyway, it's a kind of postmodern manifesto. And also, that was my thesis. So I did an alphabet, and I did 3 drawings of each letter form. These are the 3 Qs, for example. And so I explored in the thesis project to kind of put back into typography or letter forms the vernacular and the commercial art vernacular and historic forms. But again, all was done not in an authentic way, but in a kind of inauthentic, postmodern skewing. So here's our examples: H, K, J, K, X, R. I think that's a Y, or 2 Ys, an N, an H, and then the kind of pranks of, 2 pages where the letters are actually the same, but not the same. I think that was a W. And that's also when I started Sketchbooks, where I also experimented with letter forms. And also the famous ballpoint pen book started back in 1987 when I graduated, the 4-color ballpoint pen. And then I've done 30 years of what I call flyers, which are 11 by 17 pieces that also use the same vernacular. So the one is the Victorian vernacular, and the other one is sort of 50s modernism, or American, not modernism, but American signs and road signs. So it's American vernacular from the 50s. But again, it's also kind of skewed, like the Victorian is, brush lettering with little ticks on it, so it's completely contradictory to what Victorian typography was, and also also with the signs. And then I did for like Antwerp in Belgium, I just made up a vernacular because I didn't know what it was. So this is an example of what I thought it should be. And then when I went to Belgium and actually did the lecture, I said, oh, I'm right on. I've done sketchbooks. I've got about 160 of them, and they all have, each one has about 75 to 100 pages in it, so that comes to about 15,000 pages. So just think of that, how many pages there are. And they're actually not sketches, they're all finished drawings. They're just done in the manner of sketching, where I just don't know where I'm going to go, I just start drawing something. So that's ballpoint pen, and it also deals with history, medieval illuminated letters, and all sorts of kind of vernaculars. Again, endless pages. And also to the point where it's pretty abstracted. There's traces of letter forms. Sometimes you can read it, mostly not. And a lot of the sketchbooks deal with wordplay, and I also have thousands of pages of this kind of wordplay. It's a kind of faux poetry, or who knows what. Anyway, here's an example, close up. Legend, Legion, not my name. And here's a more complex one. If you look at this page, it says Mr. Halftone was taken up by a million dotted mucks, numbered and categorically combuckled, which is actually a made-up word that's half German. And but it's also an idea of saying what a halftone dots are. They are all these dots that actually make an image. So it's a kind of deep poetic, or it's kind of a fake poem, or it's outsider, or it's satire or parody, or I don't know what it actually is, but I'm fascinated by this kind of thing. And I've also done lots of projects, AIGA projects that designers, when you get a bunch of people together And these are examples of that. And they're also for fundraisers over the years where I've used this kind of lettering. And this is Mirko Elik's tolerance poster project, which is just amazing nowadays because this has probably been shown in, I don't know, hundreds of countries and hundreds of times. And I don't think in my entire career have I had a piece that's been shown this much, but it's also because of the digital era. You know, all they have to do is send a digital file and they can show the posters. There's a couple hundred posters in this project, but it's really quite amazing. Here's another one of where designers were asked to do a logo for the Design Museum in Barcelona. So I just did the bits and pieces that would make a logo. Plasm magazine years ago, using the word plasm. Here, a Japanese magazine from 2005 where the designers did pages for it, and then they did a logo on the cover. Mine is the second one down, and then there's the page. And this one has been very popular. It was the AGI conference in Seoul, and it's Hangul, and it says Hanta lettering in phonetic Korean. And this is a fictionist typographics project that Eric Bratt did in Minneapolis on his garage. He did hundreds of designers did pieces for the garage. And then I did a collaboration with the same thing with Elliot Earls at Cranbrook, so it's kind of half Elliot Earls, or maybe more Elliot Earls and me. And here's a really arty one for a gallery in London. This guy had a project called Marbled Reams, so he would get artists to do a ream of paper, or an illustration, then he'd make a ream of paper and then he would marble the edges of it. So this one says marbled reams, garbled screams, wobbled dreams. So it's lettering that's cohabits the same space, different words. And this was a great project. Somebody in Venice asked me to do 5 big posters about Venice, and I said, well, I don't really do work anymore. But I said, I already did them. I said, they're in my sketchbooks. So I picked out 5 drawings from my sketchbook, and they printed them in these huge posters and put them on the street. So here they are, or a couple of them. So they just kind of suggest Venice. Actually, it was perfect. The guy loved it. He said, oh, you feel Venice. I said, yes. Anyway, so I felt it before I ever was there. But anyway, there was some more, and there was a close-up on one of them. And of course, I've done endless T-shirts. And one day I got a call from somebody who said, would you letter Supreme? And I said, I didn't know who Supreme was, so I had to ask my granddaughter. Oh, Supreme. So I lettered Supreme. And what's really beautiful is I gave them that fancy lettering, but then they did it in stitching. So on the actual hoodie, it was stitched, so that's really cool. Another source of this, a historic source, is what's called show card lettering, which was prominent all over the world from about turn of the century until the 50s. And it was amazing stuff that was just lettered. There were signs that were inside buildings, not outside, in stores. And so I have used that. This is an alphabet, not a font. And that's a way of bringing all this together, this kind of fancy lettering. And when Print Magazine had their 75th anniversary, I did they had asked 75 designers to say something about print. And they started in 1941. In a way, they wiped out this kind of, show card lettering and commercial art vernacular, by bringing modernism into the mix. And this stuff is, very indulgent, show off hand lettering, kind of over the top. And I even did the thing. It was a digital print and so it's a paste up, so you can see all the cut lines and white out and all of that. So always and everywhere, it's the words. So I've been really interested in this kind of wordplay along with the letterforms. And these are various examples of that. And, you know, it's good for family birthdays. And my granddaughter's school in Brooklyn, PS 20, she's already passed that. But and anthropomorphic holiday piece, and then again turning it into art. These are larger pieces that are drawings with the forms, but again they don't really say anything. And finally, it's just the forms that just are a trace of letter forms. And I'm kind of interested in making art. These are larger pieces. Putting that together, you know, that kind of vernacular of decorative illustration and letter forms and gestural marks in drawing. So that's my kind of final career move, is to make this kind of stuff. Whoops. So at last, similar differences and different similarities, fragments and details. That's what lettering for me and the letter forms is really about. And so it's a kind of anal process, I have to admit. But, you know, typographers get off on serifs and you know, the different shapes and forms of the letters. And of course, they're endless. That's the beauty of it. And Rick Valicenti did a project years ago for Gilbert Paper where he asked designers, how would you remake the world? This was my contribution to his project. So there's and it says, if I were, I would remake all the world and everything in it be of lettering, which wouldn't sum up to really say anything meaningful, but if by chance it did, it would be inadvertent and therefore poetic. The moon I'd keep blue cheese. Shown above, a fragment of what matters would comprise the cosmos. So Edward Fella, providentially a graphic and not a Gnostic designer, which is important. I'm just a graphic designer, so I actually am not going to be able to make the world out of lettering. So that was in 1975. 1995. So this is the end. This is a mistake that I did on my scanner, but it heralds the digital lettering future. And I have to say, I've taken letter forms to the nth degree, but this generation has taken digital letter forms to the nth degree of my nth degree, and it's really amazing stuff. So I'm, in a sense, turning it over to the 21st century. So what you saw there was a kind of summation of the 20th. So it's up to you to continue this. Thank you.